Hello everyone, today we talk about Mamluk's troops dress around 1300, right? Based on the so-called Baptistère de Saint Louis, which is actually an Islamic piece of art. It's fundamentally a silver inlaid bronze basin that illustrates beautiful figures of, in fact, Mamluk troops that are very, they're buried actually. There is evidence here also a beautiful, complete, full lamellar armor that we will discuss specifically in another video, because costume changed over time, and there were also different types naturally of dress, right? And we could get a grasp of a glimpse of this, for example, from the video we made last year about Wafidiyya, that is literally the refugees in general in Arab, but that was referred to around this time in the Mamluk Sultanate, beginning of the 14th century, to all those mostly Mongolian refugees. Mostly, some could be retinues of, they mostly came from the Ilkhanate of Persia, right? Some properly retinues of princes of the Mongol elite, of the Mongol dynasties. For the white majority instead, however, more on average, Eurasian steppes, Tartars, and many others, as you understand. This, in fact, quite broadly multi-ethnic Mamluk context. You know that fundamentally the majority of Mamluks properly meant as this phase of history before there were the Gulams, right? They could come actually from many countries, but as far as Mamluk, Egypt, and Syria, they mostly came from the Russian, the Ukrainian steppes, right? And sometimes they also maintained contact actually with their own. It wasn't just brutal kidnapping. So they were in for the money, for the status, that serfdom here among these properly, serf soldiers. It's better to call them slave soldiers. Actually, made these troops acquirers easily a higher status than freemen in these societies. Here we can't digress on the whole background, but let's say there are aspects in this, even what appears like history of fashion, because we talk about clothes, that's fundamentally it. But through that you can spot all these dramatically important cultural influences, sometimes coming properly from the background of the people, that their cultural ethnic background that joined Mamluk ranks. Others sometimes on purpose, like for political reasons, in a highly stratified society like the Mamluk one. That Egypt especially was a much more of a state, alongside also in central control, alongside, I can say that the Western pattern, because still there was a feudal reality in a way, but I'd say whereas the Persia and the al-Zahir and other areas, especially also towards Central Asia, etc., were much more of a feudal character, Egypt was much more kind of a state. In fact, in spite of the dramatic influence of cavalry in their warfare, and Mamluks were hell of riders, also because they came, as we've seen, from the steppes, but they also had an army that the same crusaders reminded at the time to be more similar to the Western ones, because of larger presence of infantry, more of a hierarchical, let's say a steadily hierarchized military organization. We also looked at the so-called Mamluk rank emblems that are, in fact, not surprisingly, some of the closest that comes in Islamic culture to Western heraldry, but it didn't pass down generation after generation, but it was in fact mostly a subtle control thing. So we still have to talk about the Mamluks in general. I already made a video on the Mamluk military organization, I think towards the late 15th century, early 16th, before the Ottoman conquest. And we have a lot to say about properly Egypt, Syria, also throughout all the Middle Ages still. And I would say why the reference to these cultural influences? Well, because one of the most interesting features we get from the Baptistère de Saint Louis is the so-called Tartar coats, in Arab Kaba al-Tartariya, right? So this was an evident reference to the Mongol origin of the dress, right? That was, however, sometimes properly existing in Mamluk use, not just because, as we have seen, for example, the Wafidiyya, rather proper Mongol mercenaries, etc., considered that famously enough, I mean, the Mamluks had stopped the Mongol invasion of Syria and had, halted in this sense, in this area between the Ilkhanate and Syria, so the Jazeera proper, in Mesopotamia, in Iraq, and other, Kurdistan, etc. Bit of a, let's say, no man's land, right, where there was a lot of crossing in this sense, and a lot of exchange, and a lot of instability that as we've seen in that video on the Wafidiyya, the Mamluks brilliantly exploited for that matter, but that where they operated sometimes properly acting as Mongols. It is to say, everybody, more or less everybody knew who was who, but let's say the Mongol appearance was properly researched in Mamluk army at a certain level to properly make people freak out. The Mongols had a very scenographic way of war, right? It was based on a type, in fact, of military organization that at this point had already been modified with the settlement, etc. The Mamluks probably also didn't have. So here we see mostly like an Egyptian, Syrian, Near Eastern power against a Middle Eastern power of Persian nature, right, mostly. But definitely Mongol warfare had left a dramatic mark also in fashion, right? It's a bit like, the Turks had done in the previous eras at the time of the Abbasids, and a lot of properly military, also innovations in a sense, but you see properly in the costume, in arms and armor, that is quite evident from a lot of sources that we, in due time, including this one today, and that we will analyze. And so the Tartar coats were properly following the Mongol practice of having what was known as the mukallab flap across the chest, from left to right, as opposed to the Turkish fashion that instead was of right to left, right? These were important ethnic divides, because it wasn't just a matter of, in fact, of costume. It was properly saying who was who, sometimes properly for the sake of tactical recognition, but more broadly for properly as a political shout-outs. That is, following certain fashion was not important just for fighting against an enemy rather than another, because these armies were all very multi-ethnic in nature, but properly also to stress a political political current, political orientation within the same local powers, right? The Mamluks had it's like the Ayyubids. They emerged fundamentally as an external power, as many dynasties in Islam fundamentally came to rule in areas that they were not originary from. And Mamluk warfare was in itself this political declaration, that is to say, having slave soldiers bought, purchased, hired from other countries that would be instated as the military, right, the armed component of society, at least the most effective one, the professional one, proper, to fundamentally rule in independence from local political ambitions and intrigues. Then eventually, what happened is always that this same soldiers were settled down. They, so often also on the frontiers, etc., where you find, especially in the Syrian one, this more Mongol bias. Fashion, let's say, but properly also with the Iqta system in a kind of quasi-feudal but quite more central compared to Western or Persian standard governmental system, where, however, these people that were originally coming from nowhere, right, and being completely dependent on the pre-existing resources of their masters would, however, be settled down, because otherwise they would have not properly joined or remained loyal throughout the thing, because once again, yes, they're slaves, but fundamentally they are the ones that follow power, and without them you can't really do much. So they settled down, they try to decentralize. Some of them are there are in the Mamluk military organization certain corps that were created and then put aside, and all of these difficult balances of a medieval state that didn't have on average many systems to maintain power without with contemporary coercive means, let's say, and that therefore was all based on a balance of power in this regard. So in later times in Mamluk history, there were certain sultans that, with great shock, let's say, adopted foreign customs, such as al-Zahir Barkuk, that was the first of a new line of Circassian rather than Turkish sultans. So later on, Sultan al-Nasir, that shocked Mamluk society itself by adopting Bedouin Arab costume, right? Even wearing it in the Cairo citadel. So these were evident ways to separate, to essentially wink at a certain part of the dominion, and rather than another, and having very specific reasons that passed, in fact, also through customs this way. In fact, it's fascinating in a way that the Mongol-style mukallab, as we've seen it before, also featured in the Sultanate of Rome and in Persian sources, which witnesses naturally the far-reaching Mongol influence on the westernmost of Islamic domains, and naturally, well, in Persia, where the Mongols ruled themselves. Such coats were often worn under a longer top coat as well, right? What about some kind of uniformity? They surely existed. We know that in 1283, some 1,500 Mamluk guardsmen are described as wearing red satin or silk coats. That, in this regard, sound pretty much as uniforms, right? In the monochromatic aspect, and that are, however, mentioned sometimes, at least, also in other contemporary sources. For example, Fatimid Saddani's guardsmen appear to have been uniformed, and certainly as early as 1177, Saladin's personal Mamluk regiment is recorded by William of Tyre wearing yellow uniforms. In that case, the typical Ayyubid yellow that the Mamluks also adopted, together with red. Right, red was also the usual color for, as we will see now, the Kalauta cap. This uniformity was normal. We've seen recently. We made a video, but it's mostly for Western Europe. But the obvious presence of some degree of uniformity also in medieval armies and guardsmen would be the most eligible for such kind of uniformity, because they were the most important units. As we've seen, it's not just a matter of tactical recognition, but properly of also psychological sense of unity, of cohesion, of all these military culture were imbued with senses of fanatic loyalty, especially the Mamluks, as properly as slave soldiers to their masters for their reward, etc. So there's a lot in these symbolisms that, as modern people, we give for granted, but that were really, colors, as in Islam, also in the Quran, there are certain, allowed colors, others not. Curiously enough, yellow is, prohibited by, for Muslim men, and yet this is something I was searching today. I couldn't really find an answer, but the Ayyubids and Mamluks instead wore yellow, which was also the color that was usually the asfar in Arab is basically yellow, and it means blonde too. So much that the Westerners were called as asfar, right? It was a general distrust, culturally speaking. But as we have seen, these Mamluks often came from, some were Tartars, that were Turkic Mongol ethnic background, but as far as we've seen, also lots of Slavs were there. So We know it because, for example, there are musical instruments that we find in Russia and that, we start pouring in the Mamluk societies, we see in the Near East, in Egypt, and we know that there is an evident connection. So I don't know whether the Kurdish background of the Uyghurs and eventually in spite of all the influences surely that existed from Turkic, eventually also Mongolian, also the broader Persian, also cultural, primacy, let's say preeminence, also behind what we call as Seljuk, as Turkic in some way was there. But who knows, might have been connected maybe to the fact that these were more Caucasian-looking individuals. I don't know. It's just an hypothesis. I don't think it's correct, but it's fascinating to look at the symbolism because to them it mattered a lot, right? And it's just that historically we don't know, or at least maybe we know, but it's not maybe overtly studied or laid out as an information. And so, yeah, uniformity was a thing, as we've seen early on since Fatimid times, etc. Even in there, from the Ghulams, from the Mamluks, that, these men were properly brought in the state as guardsmen, as the most loyal troops, and were separated, divided, right? If you could speak about Sudanese guardsmen under Fatimids, prevalent, kind of, Kamitic-looking population, aside from their ethnic, from their phenotypes, black phenotype, but they properly were used as something different. And you know that especially Egypt has this dramatic story, especially under Fatimid times, and the last ones, especially of ferocious struggle between properly these guardsmen that were ethnically divided. The Turks, the Sudanese, the Arabs existed in such. They hated each other's guts, and they contended power in their own. They would obviously have a sign of distinction, also because they were fundamentally armies within the army, right? As guardsmen, you had to think just the guy that goes, next to the Sultan, wherever he goes. So you were talking properly about the Sultan's private army, in a sense, that was largely also logistically self-sufficient because of the sultanial resources that would also be able to uniform the guys more than others. But also emirs did, by the way, especially in the larger iktas of the Mamluk Sultanate, we have seen such things happening. Speaking of headgear, as we were saying before, the Kalauta cap, right? This was specific, stiffened and sometimes kilted hat that was known actually since pre-Islamic times, and that had already undergone many changes historically. But speaking of the Ayyubid and early Mamluk periods that we're talking about today, it was usually yellow. The textile could also be patterned, of course. There were minor symbolism attached, and we can expect some level of customization, personalization, aside from uniform, because when you speak of uniforms in pre-modern times, we mostly talk about, guys who wear clothes that maybe are even different properly in composition, but they are just dyed all with the same color. So that was the most important thing, because not even in the 18th century, all uniforms were literally the same. Nor also they would be worn out during campaign, etc. So after 1332, the Mamluks started shaving their heads. Hence, the Kalauta caps had to be trusted firmly on the head, right? With some kind of kerchief, and they had to be allowing also the wearing of more elaborate turbans, right? Then there were other headgears, actually. There was originally the four-leaned Turkish sharbush that had been brought to Egypt by Saladin. It was abolished in the later 14th century and replaced with the zamt. It was a fluffy woolen hat that would become eventually the badge of Mamluk military class as such, right? Hat color uniformity was also important. There were also different types, not just there were also broad-rimmed ones, etc. But let's say the kalautas were most common, and especially under the Ayyubids and the early Mamluks of the reign, up to the reign of Caligula, at least that is from 1290 to 1293, they were yellow. So there is even in there that continuity. They were also sometimes embroidered. Right. Today we don't talk specifically about armor, but it's interesting to notice also some kind of headgear that we get from the as properly head armor from the citadel of Damascus, a beautiful archaeological find. It's a laminated leather helmet. Right. The outer layer was made of gesso painted with several layers of orange-red finish. Right. Then there was a layer of pieces of roughly cut thin cotton cloth. Right. They overlap in each other in regular shapes. A middle layer of gesso again, and an inner layer of cloth, and then an inner layer of gesso again. Multiple layers of irregularly shaped, very thin leather, and finally part of the interior. And this had in itself, then inside were also leather supporting segments that, helmets were all made with this kind of, suspension for absorbing hits and to be more, better fitting and not to distribute the weight more evenly on the head surface. And in fact, even the kalauta itself seems to have been padded with cotton, right? So increasing through it its defensive value, some sort. And never underestimate padded armor, because it can't do miracles against most blows that arrive usually not perfectly at the right angle for cutting or piercing, and also with less power at the distance, especially with missile, and so on. From the figures of the Baptistère de Saint Louis, we see some sashes of colored silk around the waist. Still here we find yellow, albeit probably also red was possibly even more frequent there. These were seemingly the favored Mamluk colors together. And these sashes had an important, value in protection. Before we were looking even at silk clothes that, renowned English silk is used also as armor. We look at Japan, the samurai's bag that grew, that was inflated with wind, that was very good at escaping from, taking arrow shots from the back. This is a different thing, but still they added some, of course, protection. Kilted textiles had an ancient tradition in Iran and India since pre-Islamic times, and in Mamluk times they became even more popular by imports. There is the so-called tirats, embroidered panel that was on the upper sleeves of coats, right, worn usually by the elites, this ruling military at the same time, that might have had even in here a foreign, that is Iranian or Central Asian even origin, right? And it bore inscriptions with the user's name. Was worn also only by those who were close to the rulers. Also, this was naturally a political tool. Albeit this color, let's say, identity might have decreased in importance over time compared to the Ayyubid and early Mamluk times, where yellow was especially important, as we've seen, for flags and emblems, right? And red also perhaps used as a secondary kind of heraldic color, right? But in Mamluk's times, surely yellow, gold also, because sometimes it's even difficult to distinguish between the two. Red are the most frequent colors, often also mentioned in connection with diplomatic gifts and clothing. Horse harness, that was mean of, probably of gifting the Mamluks and, certain specific officers and offices attached to them, and flags as we've seen. It was properly a national clothing. We know that even Western travelers in disguise, when we wanted to look as Mamluks, they wore a certain costume, etc. Past exchanging maybe just these individuals as local troops, as local essentially contractors, etc. Speaking of the elite, Amirs specifically, but also some ordinary Mamluk troopers, depending on the level of wealth, it was naturally heterogeneous at some level, wore decorated mintaka belts. These sometimes comprised gold and silver links mounted with precious stones according to rank specifically. And there was also a black leather belt pouch suspended at the right. Footwear, very important for cavalry. Not only they consisted of knee-length, so-called kuf type boots with coverings called sak al-Muza worn over them, and even a slipper-like shoe sometimes worn over the boot. This is possible, to prevent consumption, etc. The boots themselves had this clear seam down the side, so they were closed together. These were colored naturally. They could be usually either yellow with black leather in winter and white leather in summer, which generally speaking shows naturally also the thermic concerns of these cavalrymen, often fighting in very extreme weathers, also with great climatic excursion, especially during the season. So naturally, wearing white in summer is fresher. You have to imagine here some dreadful situations in terms of also properly of logistical needs of finding water for these huge horse armies, etc. You want to literally economize on everything that makes you more comfortable, properly to spare resources. There are red boots also recorded, so even in here, together with the most obvious kind of black and white, there is also still yellow and red recurring. Amirs, as we were saying before, naturally had much richer dress than the ordinary Mamluks. We know that the Amirs of 100, so literally those commanded 100 Mamluks, for example, during a ceremony, one specific ceremony, had an outer coat of red satin embroidered in gold and trimmed with miniver, and a fringed inner coat, possibly the aforementioned cabal tartariya, of yellow satin. So again, we see red, gold, yellow again. The aforementioned kalauta cap was in this case of gold brocade with a muslin kerchief, right, striped in white and other colors wrapped around it. And finally, also a beaver's cloak might be worn. And there were generally these kind of also skins and furs, etc. That you can imagine all the very mixed background, as we were saying before. This case, just some furs or skins were particularly that they were a status symbol fundamentally because they costed, and that could make literally the rank. But there were also more practical reasons for it. Think about the importance of furs or skins, I don't know, from the steppes, warfare, etc., and economy in general. And this was surely reflected in this kind of equipment. Then maybe eventually could be overly developed to show status once again, but not necessarily because they were useless. They were mostly both useful and also expensive for the officers, for the people of higher rank. As we were saying before, we won't talk about arms and armor. We will do it on another occasion. We were talking before about helmets. There were these were particularly common in the sense that the appearance, at least, of the average Mamluk would be unarmored, albeit, as we will see, some actually wore the armor beneath the cloth, even here for practical reasons. But most of the times, some of these guys could even literally be unarmored, right? Especially the horse archers, the lighter troops, right? It was partly their interest for it. Wearing body armor beneath the outer garments is nothing so uncommon, actually, nor in these areas, not sometimes even elsewhere, actually. It might have had properly, even in here, a thermic reason, because especially in very hot weather, you don't want to expose the metal directly to the sun rays that are partly absorbed in radiation by the cloth. And as we've seen in the case of the boots, for example, with white cloth that actually white leather that reflects it, whereas in winter with black absorbs heat, things like these. And the same could happen actually with helmets properly worn beneath turbans and caps. We have seen that the lateral elements were also very, very elaborated, and considered that in medieval times, and this is a problem also archaeologically, iconographically, we can't really tell visually what, unless we don't have properly the piece of helmet in our hands, we can't just guess what material it was properly built on, because helmets were literally like modern motorcyclers' helmets, like all shiny, extremely colorful, beautifully painted, etc. And therefore it's not easy, right? Even to spot. Wait a second. What kind of material is that? Right? It's not that an archer would maybe start to think in detail where to hit on the base of that, but still, for example, concealing body armor. That's in most extreme case under padding or whatever is something, because you can't really tell easily whether the guy has something. Armor is not even dramatically thick, so it's easier to conceal than it seems. And plus, we've seen this happening in it was typical in many, also in Europe. Look at Byzantium, but other. To wear multiple strata of armor, padded armor, metal armor with different ore, right? Because armor itself, given it's particularly costly, if you have some padding over it, well, you can even in there avoid scratching and things like that. It was something they considered. Albeit, of course, if somebody arrives, it throws us, smashes us a mace properly against your chest. That's an extreme case, but in general, having some outer protection is also better than not having it in absolute terms. Aside from concerns, even thermic concerns that we were saying before, cotton padding was made of material that would naturally tend to isolate, right, both in the cold and heat. But sometimes, literally, these people cooked within themselves. They had to leave armor away. In fact, there is an interesting note by actually multiple ones from Usama ibn Udayl and other Islamic authors that record something that happened also in European armies sometimes, how armor was often carried on pack mules and only donned immediately before battle. I found in Europe sometimes people literally going unarmored because it was too hot, and they leaving the armor behind in the train, etc. Also, we have another interesting information from William of Tyre, stating that Saladin's bodyguard wore armor under their yellow silk uniforms at Montgisard. As we were saying before, and that is another note for kind of degree of uniformity and for armor properly worn underneath the dress, at least the outer one. And there would be, like, in detail, if we really wanted, there are actually other I don't know, probably we will make another video, for example, styling other types of outfits, like, I don't know, there's a beautiful figure for the history of Outremer, dating more or less the same time, 1280. Other types of dress, etc., could be found in Mamluk army. And there would be lots also about, I don't know, the saddles, the harness, all these things, but we'll leave it for another point. This was just properly for the dress, right? Then we'll talk about armor and properly the cavalry gear and all these things, but generally speaking, yeah. There is actually a beautiful passage if you are interested in top Mamluk fighter would be armed and equipped in general. From this is from Usama ibn Munkid, properly listed an inventory, right? At the time of this is an Ayyubid Mamluk, elite warrior. So this the equipment included a helmet, the kauda, a male shirt, dir or zardiya, stockings, ranat, leggings, sak, al-Muza, we were remembering before, also known sometimes as I don't know whether it's a different type or a different name, a kalsat al-Zahir, boots known as kuf, we've seen before, spurs for horse, mimats. And the spurs are, the emblem of chivalry, right? Even just in the West, the Mamluks were very much like along these patterns. Well, they fought also against the last Crusaders in a moment in which feudalism was probably at its peak, right? And they found parallelisms between these things. In this sense, naturally, the sword, saif, the dagger, dashan or sik or ninja, knife, the sikkina, lance, rum and kantariya, javelin, harba, and the shield, turs or daraka, right? And often Mamluks were equipped with a side weapon that could be the mace, the dabus, and the axe, the tabar, right? So that sometimes there was a unit of tabardariya in the Mamluk army, for example, that took the name properly from the fact that were axemen. At the same time, they had literally double hand axes. That's for foot, though, of course. And but actually there would be a lot to tell, in fact, when we will make a video on Mamluk cavalry, because these guys were able to make dramatic stunts. There was a obsessive training with all these pirouettes and stunts and all similar things that that reveal how equestrian, how advanced this equestrian military culture was properly, also in a relatively more in a country like Egypt that, as we were saying in the beginning, had less of properly of a horse bias compared to Persia or steppes, etc. Anyhow, for today we stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.